9 days after Lord Staunton dispatched his plea for help, the sound of leathern wings was heard across the sea, and the dragon Malus appeared above Rook's Rest. The Red Queen she was called, for the scarlet scales that covered her. The membranes of her wings were pink, her crest, horns and claws bright as copper, and on her back in steel and copper armor that flashed in the sun rode Rhaenys Targaryen, the queen who never was. Just like in the show, Malus' arrival was part of Sir Criston Cole's plan, but instead of watching the men he added to his army getting slaughtered, he ordered them to shoot down the dragon and her rider with arrows, crossbow and scorpion bolts. But slaughtered by the dragon, the army fell into chaos in both the show and the book. Then came the answering roar. 2 more winged shapes appeared. The king astride Sunfire the Golden and his brother Aemond upon Vhagar. Criston Cole had sprung his trap, and Rhaenys had come snatching at the bait. Now the teeth closed around her. Princess Rhaenys made no attempt to flee. Now we are getting into some pretty big differences. In the book, Vhagar and Sunfire appear together. The dragon battle itself didn't last very long. After a brutal clash and exchange of firebolts, Malus closed her jaw around Sunfire's golden neck until Vhagar came down on them from above. They all fell from the sky and crashed into the castle. But from those ashes, only Vhagar rose unharmed. Malus was dead, broken by the fall, and ripped to pieces upon the ground. And Sunfire, that splendid golden beast, had 1 wing left torn from his body, whilst his royal rider had suffered broken ribs, a broken hip, and burns that covered half his body. His left arm was the worst. The dragon flame had burned so hot that the king's armor had melted into his flesh. The changes the show has made regarding Aegon and Aemond's involvement in the battle are very interesting. Aegon was never supposed to be at Rook's Rest. He was supposed to be in hiding behind the walls of his castle, while others fought the war for him. But that's not how Aegon imagined being king. He wants to play an important role, he wants to be significant, so he takes it up upon himself to fly into battle, not knowing the danger he's getting himself into. At first, Aemond is angry that Aegon is flying to Rook's Rest, but he quickly seizes the opportunity that presents itself. He doesn't stick to his original plan of simply ambushing the dragon sent by the Blacks, and instead decides to take his chance and wait for a bit. If Aegon is victorious in the battle, nothing is lost for him. But if he falls, it is Aemond's chance to capitalize, to come home victorious while the king is beaten down, or worse. But Aemond goes one step further. When he finally arrives, he takes aim not only at Rhaenys, but at his own brother as well. Up until this point, the battle has gone horribly for Aegon, who is not a skilled dragon rider, and his dragon suffers devastating injuries. Aemond's attack is the final blow. Sunfire goes down, leaving her and Aegon severely injured. Rhaenys uses the chaos to get some distance between herself and Aemond, but after another glance back at Vhagar, she decides to fight it out, to go into what will most likely be her final battle. It is up to us to interpret what her reasoning might be. Perhaps she didn't want to leave the castle behind without giving it her all to defend it. That's why she was sent here after all. Maybe she didn't see a way to escape Vhagar. Maybe she thought back to Aegon's coronation and how she didn't stop the coming war then and decided to not make the same choice twice. Perhaps she saw a chance, however slim, of ending the war if Malus held her ground against Vhagar, leaving the Greens with only Terrasion and Dreamfire, one of them far away in Old Town and the other one without a proper rider. Whatever the reason, she tightens her saddle, tells us visually that she's preparing for the worst, and goes on the attack. The ensuing battle is brutal. Vhagar gets a hold of Malus, but Malus rips open Vhagar's stomach. After wrestling in the sky, the dragons descend on the battlefield and lose sight of one another. In the chaos of the battlefield and the wall of dust and ash, Malus goes in search for Vhagar, but is viciously ambushed by her and receives the final fatal blow. Rhaenys on Malus' back falls to her death, destroying the walls of the castle. After the battle is won by the Greens, we are shown Aemond approaching Aegon with his sword drawn, but cheating it when Cole calls for him, leaving the audience wondering if he was just about to get rid of his own brother. Just as the battle is much more detailed than it is in the book, this is another detail not told to us in the book. Oh boy, this whole episode was just amazing, and before I get into the battle itself, I need to talk a lot about the build up to it, because that's very important to understand the weight the battle holds. First of all, how did the 3 Dragon Riders end up in the battle for Rook's Rest? Let us first take a look at Aemond's character journey to understand his actions. He has always been very ambitious, conscientious, talented, and willing to live up to his Targaryen name. But as the younger brother, he always lived in the shadow of Aegon, who always made fun of him. Despite his inferiority in almost every way, Aegon constantly belittled Aemond. But that ended in the 3rd episode. Aegon found Aemond naked in the brothel and ridiculed him. He endured the taunts for a few moments, but then decided not to be bothered by what his brother was saying any longer. Despite him being completely exposed, he stands up confidently without shame, knowing that sooner or later he'll get his revenge. And Aemon is his second son. He has to earn his place in the world. He's done it before when he claimed Vhagar, and he knows he'll do it again and again. For me, that's very reminiscent of 2 other characters in the show.
We're both men who have had to cut our own way through the world. We've been passed over too often. We are the realm's second sons, Daemon. Our worth is not given. It must be made.
And in this episode, his change of heart is on full display. He openly challenges Aegon, discussing the war plans he has made without the king's knowledge. And when called out on it, embarrasses Aegon in the council. He speaks to him in High Valyrian, and Aegon's High Valyrian just sucks. He probably didn't understand half of what Aemon was saying and just goes along to get out of the situation. Aemon dominates Aegon, and he gets his way. The trap he planned at Rook's Rest is set. Moving on to Aegon, after being humiliated by Aemon, he's frustrated that no one is interested in his opinion. Alicent picks up on his bad temper and tells him the worst thing she could have possibly said in this situation. She basically confirms all of his doubts. He's no wiser just because his family put a crown on his head, and he should leave running the kingdom to more experienced statements like his grandfather and herself, while he does what's expected of him. Nothing. She tells him he's basically a king in name only. After hearing such kind and encouraging words, he decides to prove his worth. Well, first he starts drinking, and after a while, he takes his dragon to Rook's Rest. But he's not the only one out to prove his worth. There's a rift not only in the Green but also in the Black Council. Everyone is dissatisfied with Rhaenyra's leadership, or rather the lack thereof. In an attempt to prove herself, she declares that she'll fly to Rook's Rest herself. But Rhaenyra is restrained by her family. Jace is the first to speak out against her going off on her own. The contrast between the families couldn't be any greater. Alicent unwittingly pushes Aegon over the edge to his doom, while Rhaenyra's firstborn son prevents her from suffering the same fate. I believe this is a direct result of her good and loving parenting, resulting in a strong family bond. With Rhaenyra left behind in Dragonstone, it falls to Rhaenys, the most experienced dragon rider present, to take the battle to Rook's Rest. And now to the battle itself, and honestly, I'm sure you could talk about it for hours, and there's just no way I can do it justice in any way, shape or form. It's absolutely fantastic. The castle, the arrows raining down on the attackers, the attacker army with their incredible armor and their armored horses, their insignia, their siege engines, not to mention the dragon fire devouring the armory and the dragons itself, of course. It's an incredibly dynamic and immersive environment, and all is supported by Ramin Djawadi's incredible soundtrack. When the dragons finally fight each other, I also love the different characterization in the way the dragons fight. Aegon has no understanding of dragon fighting and loses the battle with his first order, which is to send fire at Meleys, which does nothing to her. On the contrary, Meleys uses the fire as a cover to attack from below and rip Sunfire's belly open. I love the detail of the boiling dragon blood burning the soldiers below. It is at this point that Vhagar arrives, and Aemond, staying behind with Vhagar for a short while, and then attacking the dragons with no concern for Aegon's life, is fully supported by the setup discussed earlier, making the battle not just a spectacle, but deeply personal for the characters and therefore very engaging for the audience. Aegon's face changing from one of relief to horror as he realizes that his brother doesn't care about his life is wonderfully captured. I'm glad that Aemond has more to offer than just being a badass, in which case I would probably be pretty annoyed by him, but we get a lot of strong character moments from him, not only during his conversations but also during his action scenes. And having that said, his coolness factor, because of the way he handles himself on the dragon back, is just through the roof, and I freaking love it. In the fight with Sunfire, Meleys is shown to be a force of nature, but she's just dwarfed by the appearance of Vhagar, which I think is super cool. And I mentioned Rhaenys' possible motivation to stay in the fight against Vhagar earlier, and I'm honestly not sure what to make of her now that her character has come to an end. I like her in this episode. She goes out fighting, perhaps correcting her earlier mistake of standing down while the Queen seized power. But unfortunately, there's just this shadow looming over her character and sadly the whole show, which is that she killed hundreds of people during Aegon's coronation. And I can't say that I'm entirely at peace with her character because of that scene. But going back to the battle, we now see the beauty but also the devastation of two capable dragons fighting. The imagery of two entangled dragons spitting fire at each other high in the sky is absolutely gorgeous. But as they get closer to the ground and to the people on the battlefield, their fight becomes a depiction of the destruction that awaits everyone when the dragons dance. Everyone is consumed by their fire, their massive bodies, their sheer power. The destruction is accompanied by a fitting muffling of the sound and the use of slow motion, which adds weight to the horror the soldiers are going through and also gives the audience time to breathe between the intense battle sequences. At this point, the battle is almost over. Once the dust settles, all that remains is Vhagar's final attack on Meleys. And she is simply an unstoppable beast, grabbing Meleys by her throat, giving her no chance. And we actually see the light leaving her eyes. It's also terrifyingly beautiful. So yeah, once again, the battle was just awesome. Going forward, it will be very interesting to see if the injury Vhagar suffered from the fight with Meleys will play a significant role. And as I said earlier, that was not in the book, so that's also going to be interesting. I expect it will. We're also going to get a lot more drama out of Aegon surviving Aemond's attack on him, and I think that's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm really looking forward to that.